And so the fact that these companies have already deplatformed a sitting president of the U.S., anything after that is on the table. They're completely unencumbered. At this point, nothing slows them down. And so I don't think they're ever going to change. I think if anything, they're going to get worse.
Jason Miller, you're the creator of social network GETTR. Can you present us what it is and how it differs from its competitors?
Oui, and bonjour, and great to be here with you. So we launched GETTR on July 4th of this year. It's a free speech platform that people should be able to express themselves politically without fear of censorship or deplatforming or shadow banning, and also in opposition to cancel culture, something that we've seen far too much in the United States and around much of the world. We've quickly grown to now over 3 million users globally, and very impressively, I think, only 37% of GETTR's customer base is in the United States. Over about the last 30 to 60 days, we've seen a massive uptick in people signing up to GETTR from France. So we now have between 200 and 250,000 users here in France.
There have been several attempts before to create a competitor to Twitter, such as Parler, Mastodon, and such. None of them have had much success. What makes it different for GETTR?
So what's different with GETTR, and very specific to Parler, is that we do have a moderation platform, and we use a two-pronged approach, both with AI, artificial intelligence, which goes and screens for some things before they're even posted, whether it be, say, pornographic images or racial or religious epithets, things that might violate our terms of service. But then we also have human moderators specific to languages, people who have been gone through background checks, who've gone through extensive training to make sure they understand our vision. And so we do have a terms of service with a two-pronged approach on moderation, and I think that's a key differential. And why this matters is because where Parler got into trouble is because they had no moderation. They had simply what they called a customer review, or they had user review or community review, where people would chime in. But the problem is that when you start dealing with hostile actors, whether it be the CCP or Russia or ISIS or even left of center adversaries, say domestically, it's just too much. Our goal, again, is to make sure that people can express themselves politically, but we want to make sure that it's a safe environment. That means that you can't, say, promote illegal activity. There's a digital town square where people have debate, but you have to make sure that it's also safe so that people can come and use the platform and not worry about receiving harm.
Mm-hmm. Twitter recently replaced its CEO, Jack Dorsey, its historic CEO. The new head of the company is already being criticized for its anti-free speech positions. What do you make of it?
Of Dorsey's departure?
Yeah.
Well, I think a couple of things here. I think one, Dorsey probably was just tired of the headaches. He's attacked by everybody. He's the human punching bag. But much of that he brought on himself. And so Twitter, I believe, started as something where they intended to do good as far as to share democracy and freedom all around the world. But what they grew into was very much something that was about censorship and oppressing free speech and really forcing their worldview, their set of political opinions onto the customers. It started initially with people saying radical things such as COVID came from a lab in Wuhan. Well, guess what? It did come from a lab in Wuhan. To then the suppression, the collusion and suppression of the Hunter Biden laptop scandal, which the big tech companies worked together and said nobody can share it, nobody can talk about it. And of course, turns out everything on Hunter Biden laptops were real. In fact, 1 out of every 6 Biden voter, when surveyed after the election, said that they would reconsider or would have potentially voted for somebody else if they'd known about the self-dealing and the grift and alleged corruption that was shown from the Hunter Biden laptop. And then, of course, when the big tech companies deplatformed President Trump, that's when we knew that if they're willing to deplatform a sitting president of the United States while he's in office, that their political discrimination will really have no boundaries in the future, and we needed more competition.
Mm-hmm. One other recurring critic of Twitter is that writers tend to reduce complex issues to very small sentences, like very simplistic positions, because in 280 characters you can't do much. Is it something that worries you, and do you have a way to go around that on GETTR?
Well, it's not a concern on GETTR. So we do have a longer post, up to 777 characters, longer videos that are 3 minutes. We also have a live stream feature, which has actually been very popular here in France, particularly with anything to do with Eric Zemmour, is very popular on GETTR. But we do believe that those longer posts give people more of an opportunity to express themselves. But then again, even though we have terms of service and we have a two-pronged moderation approach with artificial intelligence as well as human moderators, but our guiding principle, really what our focus is to make sure that people's free speech, their ability to talk about their political beliefs, is never infringed upon. And that, I think, really makes it a breath of fresh air and gives people the sense that they can speak freely on GETTR without retribution or fear that they're going to get put in digital jail.
What makes you think there's a legal future for something as GETTR? Like, basically, the U.S. Congress wants to control, to moderate free speech, wants to have boundaries, strict boundaries. What makes you think there's some kind of future for you?
Well, in the U.S., we have the First Amendment, which is the First Amendment to our Constitution guarantees the right to free speech. Now, many other countries around the world have their version of a constitution that protects some aspect of free speech, but sadly, many countries do not truly have the right to free speech, which is something that I think a lot of Americans take for granted. So we will always have that First Amendment and have thorough debates about it in the United States. But I think what we're seeing now is something that goes far beyond free speech rights. In most countries, free speech is allowed up to the point where it starts to infringe on somebody else's rights, or if it gets to the point of, say, threatening harm or doing harm to another person. And there's always a different debate as far as where exactly that line is and what is crossing the line, for example. But what we've seen from big tech is something different, and that's the political discrimination. And there's a difference between saying that here your free speech rights are not, but also disagreeing with what you're saying. That's the key. That's the difference. Is big tech just doesn't like the worldview of many populists, of many people who believe in self-determination.
GETTR presents itself as a marketplace for ideas of all obediences. However, it seems that most of these ideas are rather on the center right or on the right. How come most progressive don't find an appeal in what you're proposing?
Well, it's not so much that they don't find it appealing, but right now they don't have a reason to necessarily be angry or upset with big tech, because right now big tech's political discrimination is only focused on people in the center right. That's not always going to be the case. Traditionally, in the U.S., much of the free speech debate has been with folks representing the center left. It's only been in recent years that debate has shifted to the center right. But more and more, big tech is going too far. They're criticizing people who, again, don't view themselves as the center right. And so by big tech being so aggressive, they're almost forcing people who wouldn't be upset with their platforms to then be upset. It'll take a little bit of time, but I do think that as we continue to grow and we add more people and more voices, we do believe they'll become more diverse. But again, right now, if you're in the center left, you don't have much of a reason to be angry at big tech because they're not coming after you.
Okay. Do you think there's a future for big tech where it comes back to a rather not so progressive vision of free speech? And
another excellent question. And I get that quite a bit. And I would say that a lot of people in the center right believe that as we go and challenge big tech, or as we come up with, if we continue to decentralize social media and have new voices, that big tech will realize the error of their ways and come back and realize that. I don't think that's ever going to be the case. I think that take for a look, for example, the succession to Jack Dorsey with Mr. Agrawal. The very first day, he put in new rules limiting free speech, new things that were censoring, and even said that their terms of service are no longer tethered to the thought of free speech or the First Amendment in the U.S. And so the fact that these companies have already deplatformed a sitting president of the U.S., anything after that is on the table. They're completely unencumbered. At this point, nothing slows them down. And so I don't think they're ever going to change. I think if anything, they're going to get worse. When you take a look at, say, Google and YouTube, for example, and the fact that they now put warnings on if people bring up climate change, for example. But there's debate about how what's the exact science, where things are, and it's a passionate debate. People on both sides get very spirited. But for Google and YouTube, for example, to now start censoring certain content or say, you got to be careful, not sure about what this person is saying, that's just the beginning. I mean, once they've kicked off a sitting president of the United States, it's only a matter of time to then they start talking about maybe it's traditional values, maybe it's foreign policy, maybe it's your opinions on the United Nations. Who knows where they're going to go next?
Well, there are some very influential people talking on GETTR.
So we have again, about 37% of the customer base is in the U.S., but by no means is that the only place where we have influential. So we have President Jair Bolsonaro from Brazil is on the platform, as well as his adult sons who are all in elected office. Eric Zemmour, who of course here in France, and he's rapidly become one of the most popular users. He by far gets the most amount of activity and interest to his posts, which are fiery. So people like them. They're very direct. It kind of reminds me a little bit of a former boss of mine that I used to work for. But in the U.S., we have several dozen members of Congress, a half dozen senators. So we even have people not really in politics. The actress Gina Carano, who is in The Mandalorian. We have several UFC fighters. We have retired sports legends like Lenny Dykstra and Darryl Strawberry, who play professional baseball in the United States. And then we have a number of, one of the more powerful users here in France. We have Vlor is on GETTR, which we're very appreciative for. And we think that is, especially with the elections coming up in France this spring, as well as elections also next year in Hungary, in Brazil, in the Philippines, even the U.S. midterms, that it'll continue to grow.
Are you afraid in some way GETTR might be considered by too many people as the Twitter for outcasts? Like people who've been fired from other platforms end up on GETTR? No,
I think that so many people are choosing to go to GETTR. One thing that a lot of people might not realize is that about 20, maybe 25% of President Trump's supporters in the U.S. stopped using social media when he was kicked off. And so a lot of these people have been on the sidelines. They haven't been using it. But now they're starting to come off the sidelines and to get active in social media again. They don't want to go to Facebook. That's just kind of a dying platform. It's boring. It's clunky. It's sleepy. Twitter functionally is very good, but it's so negative. It's so nasty, and people keep getting censored or deplatformed. They don't want to go back there, but then they see in GETTR something where they can be excited about. They can have good, positive conversations, and they can feel much more freedom and less infringement.
Well, thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It's great to be here in Vlor headquarters.
It's been a pleasure to have you.
And I look forward to working on improving my French. So you have a great magazine, a great website. So thank you.
Thank you so much.